So I've always liked Unix or Linux for cloud and for server operations. The GUI just gets in the way. I just want a command line that I can automate and deploy things up to AWS or Azure or wherever they're going. However, Linux on the desktop, it's just never happened. I've been hearing about that for decades, literally. And yes, some people have run Linux on the desktop. I've run Linux on the desktop. But really, Mac or Windows gives you the more polished user interface. Well, the problem with Mac is it's a fairly small segment, relatively speaking, of the market share. Also, they don't put NVIDIA on Macs anymore. So this makes it very difficult to actually run real deep learning sort of technology on a MacBook. The thing that I've still always really liked about a Mac is that it has a Unix command shell. However, it's kind of a Macified Unix command shell that often gets into permission issues and things break as Apple goes their not so Linux, more BSD approach with the underlying core of the operating system. Windows, I've never really disliked the interface to it. It's gotten a lot better since the early days when I've dealt with Windows since it was Windows 3.1 running on top of DOS. So it's a pretty good interface, but it has the DOS prompt, the command prompt, which is not Unix. WSL is the Windows service layer for Linux. It lets you literally run a command line Linux inside of Windows. So you can pop open a command prompt, and it's a full-blown Linux minus the GUI, which is not what I really need from that. And that lets me be able to run, say, the latest version of TensorFlow or other machine learning libraries that just haven't gotten around to repackaging a Conda environment for their latest version. So using WSL2 to be exact, along with the new NVIDIA driver, I can really get the best of both worlds. And I'm starting to give Windows kind of a new look as a potential replacement for my MacBook. I know, heresy. I just got 30 dislikes right there. I can feel it. There was a disturbance in the force. But this is something that I am experimenting with. So in this video, I'm configuring this new computer that I've gotten, which has a high-end NVIDIA GPU on it, and I'm trying to see really what I can do as far as a Windows workstation for machine learning. I know, heresy, but it can work. So I'm going to show you the WSL environment, how I set this up, how I was able to basically get the latest version of TensorFlow, which as of the recording of this video was 2.2, which they haven't bothered to release a Conda Windows CUDA version of this that gives me access to the GPU. So I'm kind of getting the best of both worlds. I've got Linux running literally right under Windows, but it's not often a virtual machine with an Ubuntu GUI kind of in its own separate world. It's really like a second shell on Windows. And I'm going to show you how I set this up. To see all my videos about Kaggle, neural networks, and other AI topics, click the subscribe button and the bell next to it and select all to be notified of every new video. So at this point, to get access to a WSL version that can access a GPU, you have to join the Windows Insider program. It's pretty easy. It's just you click it and you can then install a new beta pre-release version of Windows that has this advanced functionality. Now, eventually, they're going to build the GPU support into the official version of Windows, and this won't be necessary anymore to have to go through the Insider program. The Insider program, you get lots of updates, and it's a bit chaotic. They'll tell you that the build that you're on is going to expire, and it's definitely not for everyone. So, as of July 2020, this is the way that you need to do this. This will change in the future. So this is just my installation video for 2020, and I will have a separate video where I show kind of how to set everything up in WSL for your use as a data scientist or machine learning. NVIDIA has a really nice guide for this, so let's Google NVIDIA WSL 2. And there's the guide. You need to follow every step and in order. Click on the link for documentation and scroll down on this document and you'll see the 3 steps under getting started. The first step is really just getting the right build of Windows installed. The second is installing the NVIDIA driver in Windows that will allow WSL to have access to your NVIDIA card. And the third step is actually installing WSL 2. Windows Insiders is really pretty easy. Just search for Inside on your type here to search under Cortana, and you'll see it there. Click it, and now you're supposed to choose what channel you would like. The dev channel is the one that is needed to get access to this very, very new feature that is built into Windows to support NVIDIA. And now we're going to search for updates, and we're going to allow Windows to install this new version of Windows that has been found as a result of joining this. So while this build installs, we'll go ahead and fast forward through this. So let's double check what version we need here. We need the build that is 20145. And let's check and see what's currently being pulled in. Okay, 20161, that's later. That'll be great. We can see it's 10% downloaded so far, so this is going to take a bit. While this is downloading, let's check the version that we actually have installed. You can always run WinVer, and that will show you the current build and Windows version number that you have. And there we see it. And that's a much earlier version. That's what's currently installed. We are upgrading this as we watch this. Now, this will take a while for this to completely download and install, so I am fast forwarding through this right now. We go back and click the link to download the driver. So we're downloading the actual NVIDIA driver, and it's just a normal Windows program. This is actually a pretty easy part. You just run that, accept the dialog, and it begins to decompress. And we fast forward through this part. Accept all of the defaults on this program and let it run. I'm fast forwarding through this part. It can take it a little while to completely install everything. It is done. Just click close and you're on your way. Looking back at the NVIDIA guide, we're on step 3. So let's go ahead and install WSL. This is really just copying and pasting these commands into PowerShell. This part should go through pretty smoothly, so just launch PowerShell. And it's a good idea to launch PowerShell in administrator mode like I'm doing here. So right click, do administrator. You need to approve that. And we're just going to take this first command and copy and paste that and place it into PowerShell. Back to PowerShell, paste that in there, press enter, and it will install the first part. Okay, now we're updating to WSL2. We copy this command that is going to update Windows so that it'll use that version. Paste that into PowerShell, let it run. It downloads it, and we need to set WSL2 as our default version. We do have to reboot before this happens. When you come back, it does warn you that this build of Windows will expire soon. Such is the chaos of being Windows Insider. Now, there's no new build available for me yet, so I haven't upgraded yet. The reason that I'm in this situation is the latest build that's supposed to replace this one does have a bug with AMD, and I have a Threadripper, so there's no version available for me yet. But these come out weekly, so it won't be much problem. Now, if you click on the helpful link that they give you, unfortunately, it doesn't give you much information. So it's actually an error page. But such is the chaos of trying these newer versions. Uncomfortable with this cutting edge of things, stay with the current versions of Windows. Now what we're going to do is open up PowerShell, and we're going to complete this last part to getting us to WSL 2. Now notice the error that it gives you there. You have to update the kernel for WSL before you can set WSL 2 as the current version. They give you a helpful link, which we copy there. And we run the program found at that link. It's very easy to run. You just run it. It's going to update the kernel. We'll actually have to update the kernel once more before we're done with this, but this is the first part. Now we're going to go back into PowerShell, try that exact same command we just ran, and now it works successfully. Okay, let's go get a version of Ubuntu. They have links here on the Microsoft page that we were just at. We're going to use version 20 of Ubuntu. I'm not going to sign up. I get enough email. And we'll click Get. Click that to continue. We have to go to the store. Store loads up. We get to click Get again, this time in the store. And now we click Install. They want to be really sure. And I'm just fast forwarding through as it downloads Ubuntu. Now when you try to start up Ubuntu, you might get this error. It just means that you need to enable virtualization. Now that's a BIOS setting, so I've got my camera actually pointed at my screen here, and I'll show you real quick how I set this setting on my MSI BIOS. This will be different depending on what machine you have, but I'm just going to restart to get into BIOS. It's restarting. Press the delete key to get in. Okay, there's my monitor kicking in, and there's the BIOS. This is actually under the overclocking settings. And you go down to, it's not really overclocking, but it's in the CPU settings. CPU features, and see that SVM disabled. You need to turn that on, and that allows virtualization of the type that is needed for the subsystem. Now be aware that some other virtual systems may require that to be off, so that's somewhat tricky, but this is sort of the Microsoft way that a lot of their products do this. Now I'm rebooting with this change in effect. This is a change that you would have to make irregardless of if it's a previous, irregardless of new technology. Just this is how Microsoft does virtualization. And here comes Windows. And now we're launching Ubuntu for the first time. You can also just search for it with Ubuntu on type here to search at the Courtney thing at the bottom. It'll say taking a few minutes when it first comes up. You have to put in a username. This can be anything you want. I make it the same as what I had on the computer. You can give it any password you want. This password is important when you're running things as root, so don't forget it. All right. Now we're at a Unix command prompt, pwd, and it shows you where you're at, print working directory. Now this part did cause me some confusion, so let me explain. You have got to get all these versions to exactly what NVIDIA is saying or greater, or it's just not going to work. So let me check this version. This gives me the kernel version of WSL. I'm going to run this, following the NVIDIA instructions, and it's too old of a version. And I couldn't figure out why it's not updating it. And I tried this command. This didn't work, but this was on there. They said you might try this. I copy that, and then run PowerShell. I'm going to paste that in, run it, checking for updates. Drat, no updates. But yet I'm not on the latest version. What the heck? So we look at these advanced options here. That's what I need to do. I need to turn that setting on that they're showing there. I need to receive other updates because the one that I need is classified as a quote-unquote other update. So I'm going to go to check updates. This only took me like an hour to figure out, but honest, I'm not bitter. Yeah, so click on advanced options there and set that first setting just like they suggested. Other updates are now on, so I'm now able to receive this update. Okay, let's go back to Windows Updates. We should see this available now. I have to check for updates. This takes a moment. I'll fast forward through this. Okay, now it's downloading. And you can see the version number, the Subsystem for Linux update, and it's there. So now let's go back to PowerShell. We'll run that same command again, And hallelujah, we have the right version. We'll check for updates just to make sure there's nothing else. Fast forward through this because it does take a bit. No updates, so we're good there. We're going to restart just for good measure. Okay, at this point, it's really just like regular Linux. I'm not going to install the CUDA driver into WSL itself because I'm using PyTorch and TensorFlow, which I can install that under Conda and not have to worry about versions. So now I am pulling down into my Ubuntu system the Miniconda Python distribution that I'm going to use. You can also use Anaconda if you want to have everything completely installed for you. So I'm going to install both TensorFlow and PyTorch just to show you how both of them work. And we can even create a Jupyter notebook that has both of them available, and we can just switch between those two environments without even having to exit Jupyter, which is not something that's as easy to set up in Windows. But doing that in this subsystem gives you that ability and makes this really pretty easy because you have the full Windows GUI, but you have Linux running underneath, giving you the latest version of both of these tools. So now that we have Miniconda downloaded, I'm going to copy this command, which is the command, and this is all from the Miniconda installation page, and we run that, and it's going to install Miniconda. Just accept its prompts and go ahead and download it. This does take some time, so I am going to fast forward through it. Just say yes, and you're done. You now have Miniconda installed. Now I'm following instructions that I have on my course website. I give you complete instructions on how to install these, TensorFlow that is, and also PyTorch. I'm going into the install directory, and I am going to open the TensorFlow install July 2020, which corresponds to this video. If you do see a later one here, use that, and I probably have a link to the video that I would have updated for it. Let's install Jupyter first. We'll actually run the browser to get into Jupyter from Windows. That's one of the nice things about using this Linux subsystem. You're running Linux under Windows, yet you're using the nice Windows GUI with its browsers. We'll fast forward through this. And next we'll create a virtual environment to hold TensorFlow. We'll create a similar one for Torch as well. We just run this into Ubuntu. It takes it a moment to create this. We'll fast forward through. Now it's very important. We've got to activate that TensorFlow virtual environment. All the drivers and CUDA stuff will be held in here so that we can have different versions at once. Now, we need to install this so that we can actually attach it to Jupyter. We'll just fast forward through this. Okay, that part's complete. And notice the version numbers. Windows only has 2.1. We will have 2.2 of TensorFlow since we'll be installing the Linux version. Linux is usually ahead on TensorFlow. We're going to copy the command for GPU and CPU. If you only have a CPU, just copy that earlier command. I'll demonstrate this for the GPU, but CPU is just using that other command. We'll run that. You can see that going. We'll say yes, and I'm fast forwarding through this part because this does take a while. Register this new environment inside of Jupyter so that Jupyter can find it. That's actually 3.7. I have that mislabeled. I'll fix that. That doesn't matter. It's just a label. We paste that into here. This runs very quickly, and now it's available in Jupyter. And now I'm going to download the entire archive for my course. See, I'm grabbing this URL, and I'm just going to use get to get it. So get clone and that URL, and that will basically download all my course material because there's a script that I want to run in there. Tools.yml. If you don't want to download the whole course, just grab the tools.yml file. We'll fast forward through this while it downloads. Now that we've downloaded the tools.yml file, we need to change into that directory, and we're going to run it with the command that we have from GitHub. This takes a moment. We'll fast forward through this. And now it's done. We don't need to activate like it's talking about there. And now we're ready to test it. We run Jupyter Notebook. Don't worry about that in the red. That's not actually an error. We open up a browser, log in with our password that we set before, and now we can run the whole thing. And by the way, the password that we saw before, you have to copy the token when you first bring that up, and then you set a password so you don't have to keep reusing that token. But we set our environment here, and now we're going to run the whole thing. And we should see now that we have successfully installed the GPU. GPU is available. Now there's a little warning there from something deprecated. I need to fix that, but it's just a warning. But it's available. And now we're going to install PyTorch. So I opened up my installer for PyTorch. It's in the installs directory, same place. And we're going to now create an environment for PyTorch. This is really very similar to what we did for TensorFlow. So we deactivate TensorFlow. We'll literally have both of these side by side, but if you just want one, you can do one but not the other. If you don't want PyTorch, you're done now. So we're copying that command to create the environment. We run that, and we say yes. It takes it a moment. It has to install another 3.7, Python 3.7. Now we activate this PyTorch environment. And we're going to do kind of install just the tools that we need so that we can attach it to Jupyter. And it installs those. Now we're going to copy the command that we need to actually install PyTorch. If you want the GPU, make sure you install the Conda toolkit as well. It'll probably just not use the GPU if you install that anyway and you don't have a GPU. But you can choose which one is most appropriate to your hardware setup. So we're installing that and running that. This takes a while, so I am fast forwarding through this as it installs all these various CUDA components and PyTorch itself. PyTorch is installed and ready to go. So we're going to run the tools file. We're already in the directory that we downloaded my course into, so make sure you're in that T81558 directory if you skip the TensorFlow part. But we run this, and it's installing tools YAML. Just make sure that tools YAML file is in the same directory, or you'll get an error. It is running through all of the tools. These are just supplementary machine learning tools that I like to use. You don't need to use the Conda activate that they're talking about here. That is not necessary. We do need to link PyTorch environment to Jupyter, and that's what I'm doing here. Make sure you're in the Torch environment. Okay, it's all nice and linked. So you should see both environments. I'm going to Conda deactivate just to show a really neat feature of this that you can do in Unix and not so easy in Windows. All right, we launch it. Don't worry about the red. That just means that it couldn't launch a browser from inside the Linux environment, which is true. We're going to run the browser in Windows. And then we open up that same PyTorch install script that I provided you, the install notebook. And you can see that we also need to select the environment. You can see that there's two environments available. We have both the PyTorch and TensorFlow. You can choose which one you want. Choose PyTorch. Rerun this entire script, and you'll see that the GPU is available. Thank you for watching this video, and if you find things about artificial intelligence and machine learning interesting, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and give me a like. Thank you very much.